On the night of July 23, 2026, Jon Bon Jovi had already been on stage at Madison Square Garden for about an hour and a half. This was the 8th performance in a 9-show New York residency, part of the tour that was supposed to mark his full return after years of uncertainty about his voice. The concert had not begun as a farewell. Bon Jovi had spent the evening doing what audiences had watched him do for more than 4 decades, moving across the stage, leaning toward the crowd, and letting thousands of people carry familiar choruses with him. Then the rhythm of the night changed. After performing "Livin' on a Prayer" with Pat Monahan of Train, Jon stopped. According to reports from the venue, he told the audience he was dealing with a sinus infection and could not give them the performance they had paid to see. His words were brief. "I'm sorry. I'm hurt, and you're not getting the best of me." He asked people not to throw away their ticket stubs. The suggestion was that the show could be rescheduled. Then he left the stage. Content reference we cite. 1. Index 1. There was no formal announcement that his vocal cord had been damaged again. There was no retirement statement. His representative later said the problem was a sinus infection. That distinction matters, especially when headlines move faster than medical information. Still, if you had followed what Jon had gone through since 2022, it was difficult to see the moment as just another singer cancelling because he was sick. Maybe you felt that too. A sinus infection can affect any performer. But this was Jon Bon Jovi, returning from a condition that had once made him question whether he would ever tour properly again. Every difficult note carried a history now. Every pause invited people to wonder whether the old problem had returned, even when there was no evidence that it had. I think that is what made the moment uncomfortable to watch. Not because it proved something terrible, but because it did not prove anything at all. It left a space where certainty used to be. For years, Jon had been the person who seemed built for the stage, the smile, the raised arm, the microphone held toward the crowd. Those gestures were almost automatic. Fans could recognize them from the back of an arena. Yet on this night, the most revealing gesture may have been the decision to stop. Some performers would have tried to push through. Jon had done that before, and the results had not always been kind. This time he acknowledged the limitation in front of everyone. Was that weakness? Probably not. It may have been the opposite. But it also reminded the audience that recovery does not always move in a straight line. A tour can be called a comeback, while the person making it remains 64 years old and responsible for a voice that has already undergone major surgery. So what happened to Jon Bon Jovi at 64? The honest answer begins with one unfinished concert. But it does not begin there completely. To understand why those few words at Madison Square Garden carried so much weight, you have to return to the period when Jon first realized that effort alone was no longer enough. The change did not arrive with one dramatic collapse. During Bon Jovi's 2022 tour, Jon was still walking onto stages and attempting the songs people expected. From a distance, the machinery looked familiar. The band, the lights, the catalogue, the confident frontman at the center. But recordings from that period showed something he could not hide for long. Notes that had once seemed instinctive were becoming difficult to reach and harder to hold. Critics noticed. Fans noticed. Jon noticed before many of them said it out loud. The documentary Thank You Goodnight, The Bon Jovi Story later captured part of that period. Jon had allowed director Gotham Chopra's team to follow the band for what was meant to be a look back at 40 years of music. Instead, the cameras found him at a professional low point he had not planned to document. Content reference, OE Site 2, Index 2. That matters. The footage was not assembled after recovery, with every event arranged into a clean success story. It caught uncertainty while it was happening. At the time, Jon tried different approaches. According to interviews he later gave, he explored holistic treatments before receiving a clearer medical explanation. One of his vocal cords was atrophying. The stronger cord was compensating for the weaker one, interfering with the way they met and produced sound. For a singer, that explanation is technical. The consequence is not. The voice is not an instrument you can place in a case and replace when a part wears down. It is inside the body. It changes with illness. age, stress, coordination, and time. You can train it for decades and still reach a moment when training does not solve the underlying problem. John underwent major surgery in 2022. AARP later reported that the procedure was a thyroplasty, using material to reposition the weakened vocal fold so the two sides could function together more effectively. Content reference. Way site 3, index 3. Even that description sounds simpler than the recovery was. Surgery corrected the physical imbalance, but it did not instantly return the voice that had filled stadiums since the 1980s. John described rehabilitation in athletic terms. The two chords had to learn to work together again, one careful repetition at a time. Think about the psychological part. For most people, losing confidence in the voice might affect conversations or work. For John, the voice carried an entire identity. It was attached to songs people played at weddings, graduations, bars, and long drives. It was also attached to musicians, crews, and audiences, waiting for the band to return. We cannot know exactly what that pressure felt like. Public interviews only reveal part of the experience. What seems clear is that he refused to announce a tour simply because people wanted one. He could sing in a studio. He could complete individual performances. But a tour asks a different question. Can the voice recover night after night without collapsing under repetition? That was the standard he kept returning to. The last Bon Jovi concert before the long break took place in Nashville on April 30th, 2022. After that, the public saw fragments, medical updates, documentary footage, rehearsals, and cautious appearances. There was progress, but no guarantee. Content reference, eyesight. 4, index 4. And perhaps that is where the story became more human than the usual comeback narrative. John was not trying to prove that age did not matter. He was trying to discover what his voice could honestly do now. By early 2024, there were signs that the work was leading somewhere. In February, John performed at the MusiCares Person of the Year Gala in Los Angeles, where he was being honored for his career and charitable work. It was his first public performance after surgery. Bruce Springsteen joined him, and the evening was widely treated as a return. But John did not speak as though the problem had disappeared. In interviews around the Hulu documentary that April, he described rehabilitation as steady and intensive. He could record. He could sing. What remained uncertain was whether he could meet his own standard across a full tour. Content reference, OA site, 5 index 5. That difference was easy to miss in headlines. A singer can perform one song and still be unready for 2 hours. He can complete one show and not know how the voice will respond the following night. John repeatedly framed recovery as a daily process, not a switch suddenly turned back on. If you watch the documentary, you may remember that the difficult scenes were not only medical. They showed a person listening to playback, evaluating himself and realizing that reputation could not correct what the microphone captured. There is something unusually exposed about that. Many veteran performers adjust keys, shorten sets, or allow other voices to carry more of an arrangement. Those decisions are not necessarily dishonest. Voices change. John's difficulty was that he had built much of his identity around effort. He was the worker, the band leader, the person who arrived prepared. When preparation stopped being enough, he had to accept help from surgeons, therapists, and time. The band released Forever in June 2024. John called it a return to joy. The title sounded confident, although the touring question remained open. He promoted the record and continued training while resisting pressure to promise more than he believed he could deliver. Content reference, OESite 6. Index is 6. That restraint may not have looked dramatic then. Looking back, it matters. He said publicly that if he could not perform at the level he considered acceptable, he would not go out and pretend. Some listeners interpreted that as a retirement warning. Others heard determination. Both readings were understandable because John himself did not know where recovery would end. What happened next depended on which evidence you trusted. There were encouraging appearances and reports of stronger singing. There were also clips that produced debate among fans, with some hearing improvement and others hearing strain. A phone recording from an arena is not a medical test. Still, the public had become unusually attentive to every note. I find that attention revealing. People were not simply judging whether he sounded like he did in 1987. Many were listening for evidence that he would be all right. The songs had become tied to the recovery itself. By October 2025, the answer appeared closer. Bon Jovi announced the band's first tour in 4 years. John thanked the fans and musicians who had waited. The plan included Madison Square Garden, followed by Edinburgh, Dublin and London. Content reference, OIA site, 7 TARS, Index 7. He also explained that New York mattered for practical reasons. He could perform and sleep in his own bed. That small decision suggested caution beneath the celebration. It was a comeback designed with limits, and maybe that is why Forever felt different now. It no longer sounded like a promise that nothing would change. It sounded like an attempt to continue while accepting that everything already had. When the Forever Tour opened at Madison Square Garden on July 7, 2026, the occasion carried more than the usual first-night pressure. This was Bon Jovi's first tour since the surgery. The New York residency had grown to 9 dates, creating a demanding schedule close to John's New Jersey home. Content reference, OA site, 8, Index E8. Before the opening, John said he was fully recovered. He spoke about gratitude, joy, and the exchange of energy between the band and the audience. He was not promising to recreate his younger voice note for note. The emphasis had shifted toward connection. Content reference, OE site. Signed House Index 9. Early reports were encouraging. A Forbes review of a July performance described his post-surgery singing as strong through a 2-hour set. Fans carried the familiar choruses. The band looked settled. For several nights, the comeback appeared to be doing what it was supposed to do. Content reference OE site, 10 SAS, Index 10-2. This is where a perfectly constructed story would end. Years of difficulty, surgery, rehabilitation, triumphant return. Real events rarely stop at the convenient point. By July 23rd, John had completed 7 shows and was performing the 8th. 90 minutes is not a brief appearance. He had already sung a substantial portion of the concert. That context matters. Still, he ended it. According to his representative, John was suffering from a sinus infection. On stage, he apologized and said the audience was not getting the best of him. He asked them to keep their tickets while the team worked out a possible replacement date. Content reference, OI site, 11. Index 11. The exact effect of the infection on his surgically repaired voice has not been publicly detailed. It would be irresponsible to say the old condition returned. It would also be unrealistic to pretend the history was irrelevant. A singer recovering from vocal cord surgery is going to be watched differently. That may be unfair, but it is unavoidable. You can imagine the questions as people left. Was this only a temporary illness? Would the next show happen? What did it mean for concerts in the United Kingdom and Ireland? Had the residency placed too much demand on him too soon? At the time of this account, those questions did not all have confirmed answers. And that is where what happened to John Bon Jovi becomes more complicated than it appears. Nothing available proves that John is saying goodbye. The request to keep ticket stubs points toward rescheduling, not retirement. The official explanation was an infection, not renewed vocal cord failure. Yet the moment still exposed how narrow the margin can be when a 64-year-old singer returns from a major procedure and attempts a multi-night arena run. I do not say that to diminish him. The most credible way to view the night may be to count what happened before he stopped. He performed for roughly 90 minutes while unwell. Then he decided that continuing would mean giving the crowd less than he believed they deserved. Some fans may see disappointment, others may see professional judgment. Both can be true. The audience lost part of a concert. John protected whatever remained of his voice and health that night. The band still had to decide what came next. For decades, Bon Jovi songs have insisted on endurance. Hold on, keep the faith, live through the difficult part. But endurance at 64 may no longer mean refusing to stop. Sometimes it means knowing when you have to. The morning after the interrupted show, there was still no reason to call it the end of John Bon Jovi's career. A final Madison Square Garden date remained scheduled for July 26th, followed later by concerts in Edinburgh, Dublin and London. His team said more information about the shortened show and a possible rescheduling would follow. Content reference, OI-site, 12, index 12e. That is the practical situation. The emotional situation is harder to define. For fans who first saw Bon Jovi when Runaway was new, John's face now carries 4 decades of memory. They are comparing him with the young man running across stages in the 1980s, hair flying, voice cutting through guitars without hesitation. No one can win that comparison forever. Maybe the more meaningful question is not whether he can become that person again. It is whether audiences can accept the performer he is now without treating every limitation as a catastrophe. The documentary showed moments he might once have kept private. In interviews, he acknowledged that surgery was not an instant solution. He also refused to announce a tour before he believed he could sustain one. Those choices give us reasons to be careful with the current moment. A shortened concert is evidence that he became ill and stopped. It is not evidence of a secret terminal diagnosis. It is not proof that he has lost his voice again, and it is not a confirmed farewell. At the same time, concern is understandable. You do not spend years watching someone rebuild a damaged instrument without reacting when the music suddenly stops. The silence carries everything that came before it. I keep returning to the ticket stubs. It was a small instruction, spoken under pressure. Hold on to them. On the surface, it meant the team hoped to make things right, but it also sounded like the language of someone who still expected another night. Another attempt, another chance to finish properly. Whether that chance comes quickly is not something we know yet, and perhaps John does not know either. Recovery is often described after the fact, when setbacks have been edited out and the outcome is secure. John's recovery has been public while it is still being tested. That makes the story less comfortable, but more truthful. There may be another strong show. There may be more cancellations. His voice may continue to adapt. He may eventually reduce concerts, change arrangements, or decide that the studio suits him better than long residencies. Those are possibilities, not announcements. What we can observe is narrower. At 64, Jon Bon Jovi returned to Madison Square Garden after major vocal surgery. He completed 7 nights and most of an 8th before illness forced him to stop. He apologized rather than pretending everything was fine. Then he left the stage with the future still open. For a career built around certainty, that openness may be the hardest part for fans to accept. We want the chorus. We want the final note. We want someone to tell us whether this is a setback or a warning. Right now it is simply an unfinished moment, and if you have followed John for years, perhaps that is why it stays with you. Not because we know what comes next, but because for once neither the singer nor the audience can be completely sure.